Chapter 2, Section 3, New Centers of Civilization. The role of the nomadic peoples in this part of the world really started to shift and influence other parts of the world. Civilizations started to develop in Central Asia, and again, this is similar to like Mesopotamia and regions like that. And so they had this sort of lifestyle, and this is in present-day Turkmenistan or Uzbekistan. And so from there, the nomadic people lived on the edges or fringes of these civilizations, and they never really integrated until about this point in time. So the pastoral nomads were basically nomads that had herds of animals. So they didn't stay in one place because they were moving to find food for the animals themselves. So occasionally these nomads would come into the settled communities and would create empires, like the Indo-Europeans, for example. So there was very little interaction. They might have traded, and especially those nomads would assist with long distance trading, and they only attacked those civilizations when there was a lack of food and they were desperate. So the most important nomadic group was the Indo-Europeans, and they are called Indo-Europeans because they use this particular language that's derived from a single language or a single parent tongue. Those tended to be Greek, Latin, Persian, Sanskrit, or other Germanic languages. The Indo-Europeans were from the steppe region that was to the north of the Black Sea or in Southwest Asia. And around 20,000 BC, they started migrating into Europe, India, and Western Asia. So once they combined with the civilization that exists, they formed a group known as the Hittites. The Hittites had established their capital at Hattusha, which is in Asia Minor in ancient times, and today we call that present-day Turkey. If you look at the map on page 55, it gives you a small little inset of that map, and you'll be able to see where that is located. So the Hittites existed between 1600 and 1200 BC, and their contribution to the world today is they were the first people to work with iron. They figured out that iron was stronger and cheaper to make tools and weapons out of, and unfortunately in 1200 BC they were conquered by the Sea People, otherwise known as the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were known as the Sea Peoples because they were people that lived on the Mediterranean Sea, and their lifestyle, their jobs, everything kind of revolved around the sea. They lived in Phoenicia, which is present-day Lebanon, which is on the western side of Mesopotamia. They expanded trade because they were sailors, and they could go different locations, and they brought goods from one place to another. They established a lot of cities, and so they really started to kind of spread their wings, so to speak, from Phoenicia to establishing cities on the Mediterranean Sea. And on page 56 you can see the location of lots of those, and I'll show you that map here in a little bit. The things that they created and traded were a purple dye. I'll talk about that here in a little bit. They also had cedar, and so they used that for their ships and also traded that because that was kind of a highly sought after wood. And they also invented clear glass. So you can see here the purple shaded region is Phoenicia, and you can see just to the east was Syria or Assyria in ancient times. The royal purple dye came from, they crushed a rotting shell of the murex. It was like a sea snail, and it got this deep, dark, purplish blue color, and it was expensive to create this dye, and so you wouldn't just have every person wearing color that was, or clothing that was dyed from this color. It was very high and expensive, and so therefore it really became the color that represented royalty. Cedar, again, they had large, tall cedar trees, and they floated the timber by the Phoenician traders to where they needed to take it to. And of course, the oils and the scent was very good because it also made it better with moisture and humidity. So for ships, it was a great wood. The clear glass is another one of those great inventions by the Phoenicians, and they created the glass and the art of glass making, and they are, it was created before, but nothing to the extent that the Phoenicians created it. As I mentioned, they were international sea traders that not only traded goods, but they're the ones that spread the culture from one land to another. They would say, okay, this part of the world eats this food, you should try it. Or they would spread languages, religions, that kind of thing. And they charted a lot of new routes throughout the Mediterranean and extended all the way up to Britain and to Western Africa. They established not only cities, but colonies like Carthage in northern Africa that became a rival of the Romans. All right, another contribution is of the alphabet, and their alphabet was very similar to that of the Greeks in the sense that they had letters. So you can kind of see that the Phoenicians established their alphabet. Then you had the early Greek, then you had the Etruscans, which then created Latin. And then Latin evolved and some of the things changed. But nonetheless, they had some similarities. You can kind of see where things got changed and shifted to what we would consider to be our present day alphabet, as you can see it filling in the letters. All right, so as it has evolved there, you can kind of see where some of the similarities, obviously it's based on Phoenician, based on Greek, based on Latin, and that's where we get our English language from. All right, some Phoenicians spoke a Semitic language, but they simplified it for writing, which is what became their alphabet. There were 22 signs, and those were really based on sounds of speech. And as I already showed you, it was passed on to the Greeks, to the Latins, and then eventually to our English alphabet. All right, go ahead and turn to your map. We've already labeled the Tigris River, the Euphrates River, the Mediterranean Sea, the Persian Gulf, Mesopotamia, Babylon. We labeled Egypt, the Nile River, and the Red Sea. Now we're going to label Asia Minor. This is present-day Turkey, and it's this entire peninsula right here, which is present-day Turkey, so that's known as Asia Minor. The capital of the Hittites is at Hattusha. And then Phoenicia is along the Mediterranean Sea, which is present-day Lebanon. And like I said, just to the west of Mesopotamia and Syria. All right, the next group is the Hebrews or Israelites, and they are the ones to create the first monotheistic religion that clearly influenced other monotheistic religions, and they created Judaism. What you need to understand is Hebrew history is written down as their Hebrew Bible, which is called the Torah, and the Torah is the Old Testament in the Christian Bible. So not only is Judaism a religion that is practiced worldwide today, but also it was the beginnings of the Christian religion and our Old Testament. All right, so they lived in Mesopotamia at first, and then they settled in at Canaan, which is present-day Palestine and Israel. And they were herders, not really farmers, and they had flocks of sheep. Later on, they moved to Egypt because of a drought in Canaan. There they were enslaved, and they weren't allowed to leave Egypt until Moses finally got them free and led them back to Palestine. When they returned, anywhere in between 1200 and 1000 BC, Another group of people, the Philistines, had already established their home in Palestine, and it's since this point in time where there's been conflicts over whose land it technically is, and so that still exists today. And they talk about that on Connections Past to the Present, found on page 57, where it's talking about the conflict in Palestine. All right, King Solomon established a united Hebrew kingdom, and he also controlled Palestine, and he established Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. He was a very good leader that expanded the government and encouraged trade. He also built a temple, which was a symbol of Judaism and really iconic for the kingdom of Israel. And King Solomon ruled when Israel was at its most powerful point. And King Solomon was also well known for being a very wise leader. For example, there was a child that two women were claiming what were theirs. And so they were fighting over this child. And in order to settle this, he said, all right, here's what we're going to do. We can't make a decision. We're going to cut this baby in half. You get half, and you get half. And that's the end of it. And of course, one mother was fine with it. The other one said, no, I don't want you to do that. I'll let the other woman have this child. And it was at that point that King Solomon knew that it was that lady whose child it was, because no mother would actually allow this to be happening to their child. So he was smart enough to figure out how to manipulate people and, again, established a large kingdom. Unfortunately, the kingdom was divided after King Solomon's death. There wasn't a strong enough leadership, and it was divided into two parts. The kingdom of Israel was in the north, and this was 10 tribes, and the capital was Samaria. And the kingdom of Judah, which is in the south, which were 2 tribes of people, and the capital was still Jerusalem. You can see the map here, which is again on page 56, which shows you where Jerusalem was located in Palestine. And Palestine is going to be that green area there, the kingdom of Judah, and the orange area was the kingdom of Israel. Now, Assyrians actually conquered Israel and dispersed all the people to different parts of their empire, and you can see how large the Assyrian empire was. So the Hebrew people were spread out all throughout this region, and those 10 tribes really kind of blended in with these other Assyrian empire people. The Chaldeans defeated the Assyrians, and the Chaldean Empire really was, in essence, the Assyrian Empire. Just last map it was shaded red, this time it's shaded green. And they also conquered the kingdom of Judah at this point. They destroyed Jerusalem, the temple, everything in 586 BC, and the upper class people were actually sent back to the capital of Babylon, and they were enslaved in Babylon. The Persians then conquered the Chaldeans and allowed the Jews to return back to Jerusalem. And you can see the Persians controlled a much larger empire and allowed them to go back home. And they were underneath the Persians' rule until Alexander the Great conquered them in the 4th century. And it was at this point that these people that were practicing Judaism became known as Jews. All right, so on our map, we already have these places labeled. We're going to label Canaan, which is where the Hebrews lived, and their capital city of Jerusalem. All right, ideas here, the spiritual dimensions of Israel. Yahweh is their God, monotheistic God. It's considered to be their creator. People were considered to be Yahweh's servants. Yahweh created nature but was not in it. So in other words, don't worship the sun, don't worship the ground, worship Yahweh. Admire his works but don't worship them. He was a just and good God. People should be good or you will be punished. And there also was an idea of mercy and love in this new religion, and you could have a personal connection with Yahweh. So there was really different compared to the polytheism that existed before that. So monotheism or monotheistic is a belief in one God. And during the Exodus, when they left Egypt led by Moses, God made a covenant or a contract with them, and that was part of the 10 Commandments, which you can find on page 60. and that is obviously a contribution today, not only to the Christian religion and Jewish religion, but also for our laws. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. All right, so those 10 commandments are clearly part of not only the Jewish faith, but also part of the Christian faith, and again is connected to laws. Prophets of Judaism were considered to be religious teachers, and they were sent out to act as the voice of God, to communicate His word, not to come up with their own information, just to spread the word. The age of the prophecy or prophets occurred between the 11th and 15th centuries, and mostly they were concerned with the social injustices in the world, and Judaism was clearly different than other religions simply because it did care about the slaves and the poor class, not just the upper class that were, pleased by the gods and so forth. You also had that personal relationship with God, which you didn't have with polytheism. Again, one God, words given down through the prophets, and it was written down, and anybody that could read the Torah could be a practicing Jew. Jews also said, no way are we going to accept another God, even when they were controlled or conquered by other groups of people, and this caused them issues throughout history because of their lack of willingness to maybe worship an emperor or to worship another pharaoh, for example. All right, there was a section in your reading that was talking about what young people are like in ancient Israel. And so this kind of gives you a clue as to what people were like as far as your age in Israel. The goal of marriage was to produce kids, especially sons, so that was what they were really wanting. That doesn't mean that they, didn't want the girls, but of course, sons were to pass on the name and the jobs and skills and things like that. So if a father would die, the oldest son was the next in charge. He also got rewarded for that by having double inheritance. Children were not named before they were born, but afterwards, because they would look at them, see how they would act, and then name them based on their personality. The early education was the mom's job, and that was just teaching them right from wrong. Later on, taught by their father, was of course religion, general things that they needed just for the trade or the skill that they were going to learn, or life. And a lot of times they were educated on the Torah as well, that were taught by tutors or teachers, especially for the boys. Girls also were taught how to be a good wife, mother, and housekeeper, and that, of course, was taught by the mother. All right, on our last page, we have the page of paper that talks about all the groups. We've already gone through the Babylonians that lived in Babylon, present-day Iraq, Code of Hammurabi, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. We have the Sumerians living in Sumer or Mesopotamia, which is present-day Iraq. They came up with a boatload of contributions, so you'll just need to remember one of those. Ancient Egyptians lived in Egypt then. It's called Egypt now. And they came up with pyramids, 365-day calendar, embalming, medical techniques. Hittites lived in Hattusha or Asia Minor. Hattusha was the capital city. Asia Minor was the region. That is present-day Turkey. They came up with one thing, and that is iron or iron working. This is where the Iron Age began. The Israelite or Hebrews lived in Canaan. That is Israel and Palestine today. They came up with the monotheistic religion of Judaism, the Old Testament, which we use in Christianity, but it's also called the Torah, and of course the Ten Commandments. Phoenicians lived in Phoenicia, that is present-day Lebanon, and they came up with royal dye, the alphabet, and clear glass. Now, we've just finished 3 sections. Your test is coming up in just a few days, so make sure that you are reviewing all of it, but your assignment for tonight is to review section 3. Once again, I want you to use your notes and answer those questions on Canvas, 9 points, and read section 4 for tomorrow. It's really short, only 3 pages long.